Artificial intelligence is doing to music what the printing press did to books, what electricity did to live performance, and what the MP3 did to the album. Beyond democratizing access to music creation, it's rewriting the rules of who gets to make music, who gets paid for it, and what it even means to be a musician. On this Musonomics, we've got three people who are right in the middle of it. Drew Thurlow spent years as a senior executive at Sony Music, Pandora, and Warner Music. And now he's written the book on AI in the music industry, literally. It's called Machine Music, and it's the most clear-eyed account yet of what's actually happening and what might come next. Then we'll hear from Rithvik Kundu and Jad Al Masri, two researcher entrepreneurs who just won the Berklee College of Music AI Hackathon for work that asks a question the big AI music platforms haven't bothered to answer. What about the billions of listeners whose musical traditions don't fit neatly into the Western tonal system these models were built on? And we'll get into the fight happening at Berklee itself, where students are protesting an AI music course, and the summit that brought Suno, Google, and Adobe to campus. A protest that cuts to the heart of everything we're going to talk about today. This is Musonomics. I'm Larry Miller from the Music Business Program at NYU Steinhardt in the Sony Audio Institute. Let's get into it. Drew, you've sat on both sides of the desk as a musician, as a major label executive, and now as a teacher. When you look at the AI music universe, which hat are you wearing these days?
At the end of the day, I still think of myself as like a session guy. Maybe that's because that's how I got into the business. And I still think about music as a puzzle to be solved. And the context of that is I'm given a piece of music or a chart or tab, and I have to write a bass part. And I think that's still how I approach problem solving in music. So I think the answer is that I can't separate the musician in me from this, but at the same time, I spend my days now talking about like music as an asset class and the business and policy and legislation. And so it's pretty different, but I think at the end of the day, you can't separate the music part of it, but it's all there.
Does the executive or teacher in you see opportunity where maybe the musician feels threatened, or does the musician in you not feel so threatened?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of opportunity. And I think that's writing this book was really illustrative of learning and researching where we've been in this moment before in music. I had a story after story of, oh, this thing is happening. It's going to ruin everything. It's going to ruin the music industry. Artists are over. Solitary music listening is going to cause insanity, and the synthesizer is going to ruin music, and digital recording is going to get rid of the fidelity that we come to know and love. And I just feel like we've seen this movie before, and the converse of this is that there's a lot of opportunity in harnessing this technology in ways that are beneficial and additive to not just rights holders, but also individual artists.
Was there a concrete moment, one moment in the recent 3-year or so history of generative AI where you felt like, oh, this really changes everything? What was that moment?
I think I have those moments once a week.
Yeah.
Like I follow this stuff as closely as anyone can. And even I'm just like every week I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Like I didn't see that coming. I think that first moment was in when ChatGPT launched. I was still at Sony. I was a senior vice president of A&R for 6 years at Sony, and then I was going to be leaving, and I had about a 6-month kind of exit there, and it was in that time period that generative AI entered our lives even beyond music, and it was clear and obvious to me right away that this technology was going to have a dramatic effect on music, and the pace and the change of the tech even in the first 6 months was really still surprising to me. And you're wearing a Newport Folk Festival hat. Rhode Island native, been to Newport Folk Festival more times I can remember, board member of the Americana Music Association. I'm like very, very much in tune with that community, and I love that music. And I remember the early vocal models and the early acoustic models were pretty bad. And saying to a lot of people,
you mean in the Gen AI systems?
In the Gen AI space, right? Yeah. I remember saying to a bunch of guitar players, like, oh, don't worry. Like you got a couple years before these models can actually make an acoustic guitar sound credible. And 6 weeks later that they could. So
so much for that couple of years.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting because we know cerebrally that the pace of technology and AI is evolving very quickly, but to actually see it in practice is really kind of another thing.
In the book, you talk a bit about legislation and some of the negotiation that's going on now regarding these really fair use cases that are being prosecuted in various courts against various companies. And I wonder if you think the music industry might actually win these cases regarding fair use against the AI companies or not. I mean, if you were placing a bet on Polymarket today, which side would you be on?
I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that. I do think that the music industry is going to get it mostly right. The relationship that the music industry has with tech and technology is much improved from earlier generations. It's not going to be file sharing, and it's not even going to be streaming. They'll get it right. As far as the actual lawsuits themselves, I think we're going to have a lot of partial wins for each side, and I think we're going to have a lot of settlements, so I'm not sure we'll even get that far. But I will say, judging by the strict letter of the fair use statutes, it seems like the generative AI companies are probably fair use. Probably. And some of the early decisions outside of music have kind of pointed to that. I think the distinction is that you can train a model on any data you want. It's fair use. How you get that data matters. That's the distinction.
Right.
So I don't think it's like win or lose binary. I think it's, probably with an asterisk.
Yeah. And to set up some sort of a licensing regime for the use of the music and the training. And more on that later this episode. Is there a world, say 5 years in the future, where the major labels in particular are stronger than they are today?
Yeah, I think so. We've been prognosticating the decline of major labels for how long now?
At least
30 years?
At least this entire century.
Yeah, right? So, I think it's because they're still going to be able to own and exploit and be the best place for copyrights. I was having this conversation with someone the other day. Show me an example of an artist who's really grown and scaled, like a really kind of become a arena level artist or even a big theater level artist, and has not worked with a major. Like, I don't think there is one. I really don't. And at least in some way, in some part of the value chain.
Even if they own all their own copyrights, maybe they're distributed by...
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's some kind of, there's some kind of promo team that was like at Columbia doing the promo, or they're going through ADA, or so that's owned by Warner's, or they have something. So that's not going to go away, especially as more and more music is coming out every day than ever before. How do you break through that noise? You do it with savvy marketing people, staffs, and you do it with capital, and that's what major labels have. But to go back to my earlier point about major labels getting this tech right, I talk to these companies pretty regularly. They get it. Like they know what they're doing. They have some constrictions on what they can do because they have to worry about what their artists think, and they have to get licensing deals done. But they see the landscape really well, which would not have been the case. You walk into Universal Music Group 25 years ago, you wouldn't have not have had that sentiment that they understood the modern technology very well.
At the end of the book, you land on sort of a more creative and equitable future. It's pretty optimistic. And I wonder, equity for whom exactly in this age of either fully or partially AI-generated music creation for everyone?
I'm very clear, I think, in the book to make the distinction between what's good for a rights holder, what's good for an individual artist, what's good for a songwriter, what's good for a musician who is starting their career and then ultimately will end up working with a rights holder. And I think that there's a path where it's equitable for everyone, where this tech can be applied in so many interesting, unique ways that can help anyone in any sector in any part of their journey. And that includes fans. I think fans are going to win. We're going to have a lot of interesting ways for fans to engage with music and play with music, and it's going to be really interesting. And I think we take for granted that being a music fan means you passively listen to some audio, and I don't know that we should make that assumption in the future.
Give me an example.
MIDI has done some really good research on this like being like, we talk about like a super fan, right? One definition of a super fan is someone who wants to like learn more about music, and they want to play with stems. They love Beyonce, and Larry, you love Beyonce. I'm going to put your name in a Beyonce song for your birthday.
Dang.
Right? Or I want to hear that horn part in Single Ladies. I don't even know if Single Ladies has a horn part, but assume it does.
It should if it doesn't.
Yeah, right. And or they wanna do a mix and mashup, or I want to hear how this Bob Marley track sounds as death metal on a whim. And that behavior is all over TikTok. It's all over YouTube. Fans are doing it. And the interesting part about now is that the industry gets that. The old industry would have suited to oblivion or tried to crush it.
Right.
The new industry is doing license deals, welcoming it into the fold.
Right. Maybe we can get a toll for enabling that to happen.
Exactly. That's one small example, but the way music is going to be used in gaming, AR, VR, MR, I'm very bullish on that future. The way we'll have, this is the week or the month that Surreal AI was acquired by Warner Music Group. The idea that we might have some credible tracking and remuneration for music used in models, that could be a revenue stream. I just think there's a lot of ways that music can be used and monetized, and the industry, I think, is here for it.
What do you think would have to be true legally, politically, structurally for artists to really win this time?
The kind of AI Bill of Rights that the last U.S. administration put out, and the ASCAP principles of AI and the EU's, they're all pretty similar. And they all kind of, the Roland and Universal one, they all kind of spell out like 6 or so tenets of a responsible future. And they include things like ability to audit these models to make sure that you know how your content's being used. They include the ability to opt in or opt out, so you don't have to be part of this if you don't want. The ability to strike license deals in a fair way, and also have those license deals expire in short time horizons so you can react to market changes. They include the ability for training data to be diverse and not burdened by the biases that we've had in the past, which is what we're going to talk about in a bit, and some other, things that are kind of sensible. So I think those are pretty good benchmarks, and I think that we should aspire to those.
So I want to stop here, but I want you to stay with us because we have 2 guests who I think you know reasonably well, who just won, among other things, the Berklee Ames Hackathon competition. And I have a feeling you may want to weigh in on what they've been building.
I'm thrilled to be sitting here with champions. You know what? Like the Knicks, whatever, the World Cup, whatever, the Hackathon winners, like that's what I'm here for.
More in a moment. I'm joined now by 2 researchers who just won the Berklee College of Music AI Hackathon. Yay! We have Rithvik Kundu, who is a music technology researcher. He is a managing director at early stage music tech fund Joker Deck and co-founder of the NYU Gen Audio AI group. And we have Jad Al Masri, who is a violinist, a composer, a technologist, and the founder of Motif, a firm that we'll be hearing a bit about over the next couple of minutes, where Rithvik is also an advisor. Motif is a company that is building culturally inclusive music AI infrastructure, and it's backed by Techstars and, among other things, the Australian government. And so, Jad and Rithvik, congrats and welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Let's start with the problem that you are solving. You've both said that today's AI music models kind of fail at generating and representing non-Western music. What do we mean by that question? And I want to unpack that a little bit and get at what kind of a problem that really is.
Okay, well, I think we should first start by looking at how AI music is generated. For those listening who may not be as familiar, AI-generated music comes from something we call text-to-music, which is quite simply If you wrote in, in a commercial music model like Suno, write me a theme song for the Musonomics podcast, it'll generate that with lyrics, instrumental, vocals, everything you might need. Now, models like Suno and Udio, along with other open source models, ones that you can access without paying, are trained on various data sets of music. And that's how the model learns to create the music that you're hearing. Now, with most of the training data out there that Suno and Udio use and, other generative models, oftentimes it's trained on Western music that we in the US and, in other Western regions are relatively familiar with.
Anglo-American repertoire.
Exactly. And so these models become very familiar with that, but at the cost of not being as familiar with other regions of music. And so there's a question of inclusivity. And I think, Jad, you can sort of take it from here.
Yeah, for sure. I echo all the sentiments you mentioned. And I think it's very important to contextualize a few things, which is, when we say cultural inclusivity, what we want to establish here is that there's a difference between, as we discussed, this Western soundscape. And from a musical perspective, that's very driven and grounded in meaning derived from harmony. It's harmonically driven music. But music emerging from the areas of the global south, for example, broadly referring to the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, not all of that's very harmony driven. A lot of it is modal. And for instance, in the Middle East, the maqam tradition is overwhelmingly modal. It incorporates microtonality, as does Indian ragas and their systems. You can get even more nuance to that through, for instance, Balinese gamelan. But without getting into that specifically, I think it's very easy to state that these populations collectively constitute over 5 billion people.
5 billion people.
Yes.
Wow.
If you add the numbers up together.
Yeah.
However, as the latest machine learning literature has substantiated, less than 6% of these regions' musical styles, traditions, tuning systems, rhythms, make up the audio training data powering these open weight models. So what that means is, if you go on to a lot of leading models and type in a request for a song that's specifically requesting tradition-specific attributes, like for example, you want to generate a oud solo in maqam bayati, what ends up happening is you get something that's from Disney's Aladdin. It sounds incredibly stereotypical, very harmonic minor, sounds like you're surfing through the desert on a carpet, right? That's exactly what happens, owing to a fundamental limitation in the data. But not only that, there's limitations in the way we interpret the data. A lot of machine learning techniques are grounded in the assumption that there are only 12 tones in music, and that when we embed evaluation metrics, not going to get too technical, but you can only perceive them through those sort of lenses, which I also think is another limitation, which is everything that we're tackling at the moment.
So is this a data problem? Is this a design problem? Or is it something deeper and maybe even more, I'll use the word nefarious than that?
It's definitely a mix of the first two.
Huh.
Both a data problem in the sense that there is an underrepresentation of such cultures in the data, but from a design problem also, the way in which we've architected a lot of these technologies is predicated upon these listening conventions, which can ostracize those that I've mentioned before. So it's a mix of both, I would say.
So help me make the case for why this matters in the way that music AI is developing beyond the academic.
Absolutely. I think, Drew, you touched on this earlier when you were mentioning, the future trends leaning towards very heavily personalized listening experiences through remixing and stem splitting, etc. That indicates that there's more of a deeper relationship with music amidst the listeners, much than there has ever been before. And so generative music tooling, as we've seen the reports of Spotify releasing remix features and Udio Starstruck, etc. This all converges to the points of personalization. However, given that we've established this, that AI music's becoming a major way, and the technologies underpinning it, that music is created, recommended, discovered. When it comes times for these populations, keep in mind, by the way, these are heavy users of streaming services already. when it comes time for them to start reflecting some of their cultural traditions in these more personalized listening experiences, you can imagine where I'm going with this. It's going to be fundamentally limited. And not only that, if we fail to acknowledge it at the data level and continue training models synthetically, you risk baking in this limitation at the synthetic level, and then that just compounds at scale.
So to zoom in, what breaks if the AI systems can really only fluently generate music that is trained on Western tonal music?
When you say what breaks, what do you mean by that?
In other words, when we think about the projected growth rates for music industry, revenue consumption, streaming growth, and so on,
yes,
do you see a point where the growth rates falter or where the projections just fail to hold up? If the underlying AI systems that are at least partially creating much of the music that will be uploaded and is being uploaded today doesn't reflect non-Western ingredients.
I'd put it this way. I'd say for a lot of these companies, it would be quite outlandish for them to have raised that much capital to only be Western serving and not think globally.
Yeah, especially since the research on the growth of streaming is not in the West anymore.
Absolutely.
No.
Have you found the same problem with recommendation engines
Yes.
on streaming? I'm wondering,
Yes.
and I'm thinking back to earlier in my career when I was running Pandora's music team and we had the Music Genome Project. It was
Fantastic project, by the way.
taxonomy of music. And I remember not being able to ingest. I remember meeting a cab driver in this Bay Area, and I was telling him about Pandora. And at this point, Pandora was, a big public company.
Yeah.
But I was like, you can listen to anything you want. And he tried to put in his favorite music and it wasn't on there.
Yeah.
And I was like, no worries. I'm going to give me the name of the artist. I'm going to get with the curation guys. We'll get it in there. And they were like, we built this Music Genome Project around Western 12-tone scale. We can't have violinist gamelan. We can't have oud music. We can't have the Southern West African, the rhythmic music. We just don't have the taxonomy for it.
That's exactly right.
No, and I think it touches on, I want to say, to zoom out, it touches on another point of you guys have heard of the, the psychology behind someone seeing themselves represented in a TV show or a movie, right?
Yep.
And they feel empowered. They feel like, they could
They
see.
feel seen.
They feel
Yes.
seen.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So if AI music takes the turn that we believe that it will and becomes more mainstream, especially in these other regions, being able to feel represented and seen is essential, because if we don't have that, then what reason do they have to use that software? Similarly to what you're saying about Pandora and the story here, they need to have an incentive to use it. And the incentive is that they're going to be represented. Why should they use this if that's not going to happen?
And I mean, without so, it risks something that we've coined in collaboration with some of our research partners in the University of Sans Malaysia, which is acoustic gentrification.
Yeah. I love that phrase.
You can imagine that, right? Because then not only does that start happening, but it's technically risking cultural extinction at scale through the technological emission.
Rithvik, I know you've done some research on whether humans can tell the difference between music that was created wholly by an AI or human-created music. Have you tested non-Western listeners and whether you've noticed any differences in that regard?
Yeah, so we tested a few. And so there's one thing I want to sort of put a touch point on, correction on. So Deezer tested whether people can be fooled by AI-generated music or not.
That was a good study, yeah.
We tested why that's happening and what people prefer. And we believe that whether we want to know what people prefer between AI-generated music and human-made music in a blind setting. So for that study, which will be out soon, it's called The Future Music Production, is AI taking over, we looked at 4 genres: cumbia, norteña, and reggaeton, which are Latin-based genres, and then Latin trap and garage pop, which for the purpose of this discussion, we'll call them sort of Western-based or derivative, Latin trap coming from rap and, garage pop being like derivative of pop. Now, what we found, since some of these listeners were familiar with the Latin music, we found that, okay, a good way to put this is we found that they resonated more with the human-made music, which came from the Grammy winner, Mr. Sonic. We found that most listeners resonated more with the human-made music of the Latin genres than they did with the and the AI-generated music seemed to resonate more slightly with the Western derivative genres. And what's really interesting there is that with the non-Western genres, we also asked people what genres these songs reminded them of as stimuli. So for the human-made stuff, in pretty much all these cases, with all four of these genres, people were citing similar genres or artists that actually made sense, right? But I remember for one of our cases in the reggaeton tracks, for the AI-generated track, someone mentioned K-pop. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure how you got that, but, that was something where I was like, that is a reflection in some capacity of the data that's being used to generate the non-Western music that we use for the reggaeton stimuli. That also being said, because the human-made music resonated more, a lot of people cited that it was authentic and it felt that way. But with Western music, we found that authenticity and familiarity came to sort of a standstill with each other. Hopefully that had some context to everything.
And what do you think is the takeaway from what you observed?
The takeaways are that with acoustic-based instruments, they're going to have a harder time, like AI-generated music will have a harder time emulating acoustic instruments and non-Western instruments at that, as compared to Western-based instruments. If AI-generated music resonates more with listeners in a certain genre, it means that they have more data for it. But without that, it means that they don't have enough data, or they don't have enough of an understanding of how to fine-tune their models for said data. And data meaning like the music that is being used as an ingestion.
It's really interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. The training data is precise. There's more of it.
Yes.
It's cataloged better. It's tokenized better.
Exactly.
Also, we have to I'm very uncomfortable with this binary of human versus AI.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad human music out there.
Indeed.
And there's also a lot of human-made music that is incredibly focus grouped, put together with samples.
Yeah. No, it's a good point.
So someone comes in and says...
And there's a lot of human-made music that is supported by AI tools.
I don't want to call out any musicians, but very well-known pop stars come in and sing their top line, and then they digital signal process it to death, and what you end up hearing is barely a human signal anyway. So
of course.
I'm also not surprised that the more indigenous acoustic music wasn't able to be replicated with an AI model, but the very splice-driven, sample-based, sequenced pop music of a modern Western world is.
I think that's a great way of putting it. In some way, the other takeaway I found, and again, I want to preface this with, this was a small sample size and a pilot version of, a study that I hope becomes much larger, that because Western-based music is not only formulaic, but we understand the formula. Like, I feel like, with a lot of pop songs, they feel familiar to us now because, we've heard it. We've heard similar productions before, like Espresso, for example, was made off of 2 splice samples. And, I think there's a lot we can say about why it became popular. Sabrina's a great vocalist. But I think another thing is that the instrumental felt familiar to a lot of listeners, especially in the US.
Right.
Because, we've heard iterations
There's
of
some
it.
great research going back decades where people like what they've heard before.
Exactly.
A lot of research on that.
Sabrina is a great example to demonstrate that, because when she was at Coachella, there was that lovely woman in the audience who performed that, what we call the Zagrota, which is a very high-pitched yodeling sound equivalent, which is a celebratory exclamation. And in that moment, she, was taken aback and said, "What is that?" And the person in the audience said, "That's my culture." And Sabrina was saying, "Oh, I don't like it." because it sounded foreign.
Yeah.
And there wasn't really that understanding.
Is it like an Inuit throat singer kind of thing? Or is it like...
Yeah, you'd have to hear it to understand.
Okay.
I think I might have heard it in a Moroccan wedding once.
There you go. You're probably not too far off, right?
Yeah.
This just goes to show exactly what we're speaking of, but at the same time, it goes back to the familiarity points.
Yeah.
What you're familiar with is what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And especially now, I do see a lot of these technologies also acting as a discovery tool. But if you're discovering something that is claiming to be a culture when in reality is not reflecting it properly, you're getting the wrong information. So,
Jad, you're building culturally inclusive music AI infrastructure. That is what Motif is about. And yet, inclusive or inclusivity isn't what the tech industry is really world famous for or delivers on that often. And I wonder who gets to decide what counts on authentic representation of a musical tradition. How does it work now? How should it work?
It's a great question. I think that there is more objectivity to music than is properly acknowledged, I think, because I think we can all agree that there are standards to be abided, or there are standards to follow in order for something to adhere to traditional music theory and concepts. As it concerns cultural traditions, this is where the role of experts come in. They've poured their heart, soul, and time into developing a level of expertise that I don't believe can be outsourced, and even if it could, it shouldn't, because of the way in which they are the living experience of it. And so with reference to the first cultural tradition that we're focusing on at the data level, which is the Middle East and the Maqam tradition, a lot of our annotations at the data level were conducted by experts in the field. And they were, referenced and compensated accordingly to make that happen. Because if we're judging authenticity by who, it shouldn't only be one person, and there should be a relative consensus. And there is, and it's substantiated in the theoretical literature too. But it just needs to be translated at the data level. Applying that at scale means consulting with these artists and consulting with these experts in a very dynamic manner to ensure that the standards there are representative of what exists. And it's not something that, ought to be shortcutted, I think.
You're talking about musicologists who...
Absolutely, but even practicing musicians, ethnomusicologists, and those who, have written foundational literature for these traditions as well. The thing also, the reason why it's so important is because a lot of these traditions rely on orally transmitting information as opposed to always writing them down. It's a luxury if you can actually access a lot of that information in writing. So that's why the consultations become very important.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Can you speak to what ethically trained AI is and how you're approaching it at Motif?
Absolutely. I can't speak to the opinions of other music companies and how they approach it, but in the context of how I envision it, ethical means that a person's who, and let me get something clear as well also, when we say training data, this was a really important sentiment echoed at the AI Music Summit, which was, what is training data? Remember, it's creative work. It's not just data. You're stripping the life from it. Because it's creative work, it needs to be respected as such. And what that means is that the user who consents to being trained on establishes consent. Second, that they're compensated for it accordingly. And the way in which that is structured differs according to the nature of the business. But obviously there's that. And there's transparency and attribution. Those adhere to traditional copyright principles. And I think as long as those frameworks are in place, it is a major leap forward in ensuring that this benefits as much the rights holder as it does the company, I think.
And I will also say, just on account of the ethical side of things, in Gen Audio, we worked with a few companies that ethically trained their models, and they produced stellar music for our producers to use. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Lemonade Music. They were recently acquired by BeatStars, but the way that they work is that they outsource the music of hip-hop producers that then give their data to, they give their music to train the Lemonade models. So when a user generates a hip-hop melody, the producers are compensated through the model that they have. And that's really good for the producers. But I will also say, just having personally used it, the generations are quite good in, like, they're really good for the genre that they're specifying for and that they were training for. So, and this is also going to something called like fine tuning, where because they're able to zero in on hip hop music as opposed to everything, because they're attributing to a smaller sample size, they're actually getting more precise generations.
The inference scale in these models is rapidly improving.
Yes.
Even when you do widen the net and train on everything, the first Suno model versus the recent 11 Labs model. I mean, I think 11 Labs trained on what 1/100th of the data set.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's really, really improving.
For listeners who have been maybe outside of the music and AI bubble, there has been something happening up there in Boston at the Berklee College of Music. And in April, there was a large group of students supported by some faculty who were protesting the existence of a course called Bots, Beats, and Bytes, which has actually been offered for a couple of years. In this course, students generate music using AI tools. And just several weeks ago, Berklee convened the AIMS Summit, which included the hackathon that you two prevailed at, which was hosted by some of the sponsoring companies, Suno, Google, Sony AI, and Adobe, among others, who organized the hackathon. The petition that the students and some faculty had circulated called for disbanding the course and, to quote, any other promotion of generative AI at Berklee. Sounds kind of extreme. Drew, you were there too, and you teach at Berklee, and Rithvik and Jad, you just competed in and won the hackathon, and also spoke at the same conference. And I guess the first question I can direct to Drew, and so I think it kind of cost a lot to go to Berklee. Are these students in the right in protesting the use and exposure to AI in this elective academic course or not? I mean, what's motivating all of the concern?
I'll give you two answers. Number one, as a professor at Berklee, and actually one of the three professors who do teach AI classes, I've been instructed not to comment on behalf of the university, but I will give you my take.
This is your personal take,
this is my
not
personal
Berklee's take.
Yes. I think college students are doing exactly what they should do. I think if there's something that they find a problem with, or they are exploring and they want to use their voice, I think that's great. On the other end of the spectrum, I think the school is pretty clear that this is important technology. It's everywhere. And importantly, education is not endorsement. And it would be an issue if a student graduated from a business program at Berklee and did not know the latest with AI in the landscape there. That would not serve the student. The school is pretty clear that we're going to continue to offer these classes. This is an important part of modern music, and it's also an elective. So it's not like anyone's requiring to take the class. And I will say, even overarchingly, even be outside Berklee, the students who are engaged in this stuff and are learning and really taking the time to be curious about it are the ones who, they're not the ones protesting. Those are the ones that have the least concerns. Those are the ones that are more excited about it. Those are the ones that can make the distinction between generative AI and other kinds of AI, of which there are plenty. Yeah. And they are the ones who kind of understand how to best use it for their best advantage.
Let me turn to Rithvik and Jad. So is there a conflict of interest here in training students to work with the products made by these companies, or are you seeing no conflict?
I'd like to say something. Ricky and I both, outside of the conference, spoke at lengths with the students outside to understand their perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important context because I want to hear it from them.
Sure.
Right.
What did they say?
A lot of their concern came from a lack of consultation. And so that's why I think that multiple perspectives can exist simultaneously, just like in quantum mechanics. Okay. And what we can take away from that is, I think there are some great guiding principles, and that is empathy first, transparency, consultation, and consent. If those are in place, then what had occurred is merely an exchange of feedback from the students to the providers of the education and vice versa. And so those are some initial thoughts on it.
I think Jad put that very well, and probably better than I'm about to. But I think I'm going to touch on the empathy point.
Sure.
Because, for those who don't know, I very recently graduated NYU's music tech program, and I was running Gen Audio and AI for 2 years. And the whole point of Gen Audio was to have conversations like the dialogue that the students were trying to have with, the overall university, from the understanding that Jad and I had. So, there's a few things. When we talked to them, like one of the first things I said was like, look, I've been where you are. I just graduated. I was also very uncertain about what AI and music was going to look like for our field. And I've had a lot of similar conversations with friends of mine at NYU. What they told me was that they seem to have an issue with Suno and Berklee's, Berklee's relationship with Suno, more so than some of the other generative companies. But the overarching thing that I got from the conversation with them, was that they want a seat at the table, right?
Yes.
They want to be able to express how they're feeling, what they feel is best for their education, by being able to talk with, the faculty, the administration, and, of course, these companies as well on their level. And so, I told them about Gen Audio and how I founded it to literally have those types of conversations with people. And, for context, we've brought in Sony AI, Udio, Lemonade Music. I'm trying to think of a few others that are worth noting. I don't know if you guys know Roger Dannenberg, but he's the guy that made Audacity. We had him in for a session at one point. And, I was telling them that the thing that I emphasized with our members was that not only is it important to understand, how to train a model, how to conduct research, how to, make music with these things, but also how to have conversations with executives and speak on their level. Because if you're able to sort of go through that dialogue translation, then they're going to understand your needs. And when I told them this, they were very receptive of it. And I gave them some ideas on how to start dialect of their own. And I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure if that would make sense to them, but, I'm really glad that it did. And I think the reason was because, I also wanted to make sure that NYUers were prepared for those conversations.
And they are.
I feel
some of them anyway.
I'm hoping that'll be more as the years go by, and I'm confident that they will, because Gen Audio is, as of a few months ago now, fully formalized into the university.
Jad, is it possible to be pro-cultural equity and pro-AI at the same time?
See, that question has a assumption baked into it, which is that AI is a very loaded term. So let's get our definition straight.
Okay.
This is where my legal background sort of forces me to get this right. Okay, AI.
Yeah.
It is not just generative. Let's establish that.
Right.
It is a suite of technologies.
Right. My bad.
That's totally
yes,
fine.
You're right.
In the context of music, that expands into, stem splitting, music captioning, a whole suite, mixing and mastering tools, etc., etc.
Isotope is a good example of using machine learning rather than generative AI.
Exactly. So it's all under that umbrella. And so if we're going to talk about serving a recommendation algorithm or a search algorithm in order to discover music, which is like on Spotify or YouTube, it's a key tenet of machine learning, and that exists at the intersection of culture and AI already. So there's ample evidence to suggest that that's the case. So I wouldn't be inclined to believe it otherwise.
Drew, in 10 years, when we look back at this moment, what are we going to think about those student protests at Berklee? Will we be thinking back that, well, maybe the students were right, or do we think that the students missed something important about this moment?
I don't think the students necessarily missed anything important, but I also don't think I'll be teaching the music and AI class at Berklee in 10 years. Just like the person who taught the digital music class 10 years ago no longer needs to teach the digital music class.
It's just the music production class.
Embedded in everything we do now.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the students will come to understand that this is just another example of emerging tech and disruption in a long line of it.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of the students. I think they should be advocating. I also stopped and talked to the students, and I went up to them and I said, "Hi, I teach the music and AI class. Do you hate me?" And they were very willing to have the dialogue,
Yeah,
and I completely understand their perspective. I think a lot of the anxieties around AI go way deeper than music. If you're a young person, you've heard that AI is going to kill the environment and ruin any hope of employment. And I think a lot of that anxiety and sentiment is wrapped up in anything AI, whether it's music or not. So I completely empathize with someone graduating from college and trying to make their way in the world when everything seems very disrupted. But I think that AI is just kind of, in a lot of ways, just more of the same. We've heard this story before.
Machine Music by Drew Thurlow is out now. Jad Al Masri's company is Motif, and you can find them at motif.com. Rithvik Kundu is co-founder of NYU Gen AI, supports music tech startups at Joker Deck. Links in the show notes. As we say, Drew, Rithvik, and Jad, this was exactly the conversation that I was sort of hoping that we would have. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's been a pleasure.